Hi there, and welcome to this week's vlog. And as always, I'm so grateful when you take a little time to join me. I want to take up a theme that I've been perhaps talking about quite a bit over recent weeks, and that is of running and keeping fit. Because if you've been listening, you might remember that I mentioned that I decided to have a go with the what's called the Couch to 5K program, which aims to get you exercising and running 5K over a period of weeks, building up slowly by slowly. So I did that, and then I've done, I think, 2 or 3 park runs. And unfortunately, I'm not able to do this weekend's park run because I've got a little injury. Oh, yes, a little injury, which means I'm still okay walking, no problem. But if I start running, and especially if I start stretching, it's quite painful in my legs, so need to give it a rest. And so I can't do this week's park run, sadly. But I mention that because that leads into what I wanted to tell you about, and that is that our vicar, Tom, his wife, Claire, put me in touch with a local Facebook group called 6 a.m. Warriors. Sounds a bit daunting, perhaps, but it's not about fighting, it's about running and exercising. So they go out at 6 a.m. A few times a week, running or or exercising anyway, often running different routes around the area where I live. So I joined that group, and I've been out a couple of times with them, which I've really enjoyed. And it's a great little group, lovely people, very friendly, welcoming, and they, no matter what pace you run at, because they keep tabs on the person who's the slowest and don't leave them behind. So it's a very encouraging little group. And I mention that because the lovely lady who leads the group, who's also called Claire, is visually impaired, partially sighted. So when she runs, although she can see some things, she doesn't have peripheral vision. So she needs a guide runner. And what happens is that she holds this kind of little ribbon, and a guide runner runs alongside her holding the same ribbon. And if there's any particular obstacle coming up, or uneven ground, or perhaps a loose dog, the guide runner warns Claire, and he guides her along. Obviously, a guide runner is someone who guides. And quite rather dauntingly, last time I turned up to the group, Claire's normal guide wasn't there, so she asked me if I would do it, which is an awesome responsibility. But I said I'll give it a go. So she gave me some guidance on different instructions you need. So Claire and I ran side by side on the route, and some of the route was on the pavement. If we're coming to the edge of the pavement, I had to give a countdown and then tell her when to step down and onto the road, and then the other side, count down and step up onto the pavement, and various obstacles as we were going around. So it was quite an interesting experience, because you've got to not only take care of where and take note of where you're running, but also take note of Claire's situation as she runs alongside you. Anyway, we got round the course without Claire tripping up or me making any massive errors in guidance. But it's just got me thinking about the whole area of guiding and leading others. I'm reminded of that passage. There's several passages of this nature, but one particularly in Matthew 15, where Jesus is speaking about the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the people who are supposed to be leading their people, but actually Jesus is far from impressed with the way they're doing that. They give instructions, but they don't follow them themselves. And Jesus was quite critical of many of the Pharisees for the regulations and the rules they tried to press on the people to make life hard for them, and that they weren't actually a good example themselves. And in fact, Jesus says in Matthew 15, I think verse 14, they are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. So what Jesus is saying, look, if you want somebody to be your guide, they need to be people who can see clearly the way and offer helpful guidance. If a blind person is guided by another blind person, that's not really going to be a great deal of help, is it? I don't know if you remember, if you're in the UK, some years ago, there was an anti-smoking advert on the telly, and it showed pictures or instances of children imitating their parents. So dad would be perhaps cutting the lawn, and the little child would be walking alongside with maybe a toy lawnmower, or mum would be doing something, and the child would be looking and trying to imitate. So pictures of mum and dad doing things, and the children would be in their way imitating what their parents were doing, because the parents are the example, the guide, if you like. And then right at the end, there was one of the parents, I don't know whether it's mum or dad, sort of smoking, and behind them was the little girl. She was imitating that, not with a real cigarette, but the message was that parents, adults, set example for children. And if you set a bad example, the children may well follow that bad example. So I suppose that's a challenge for us today, isn't it? If we are to be guides, if we are to set an example, what kind of example are we setting for our children, for the children who set us, or even for others? If people know we are followers of Jesus, and they look at our lives, what do they see there? Is it a good example? Are we helpful guides? Or perhaps not? Paul was able to write in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, amazingly, he says, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." Now, that is an awesome thing to be able to say. Could I say that to someone? Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So that's this week's challenge. What kind of guide am I? What kind of example does my life set? And I'm sure none of us are perfect, but let's try in God's strength to be a kind of example that others can follow and lead the way as we walk with Jesus. Just to mention before I close, there'll probably be 2 or 3 weeks before I do my next vlog, because I'm taking a little break, but I will be back, as Arnold Schwarzenegger said famously. So thank you so much, as always, for listening today, and may God bless you richly in your lives and in all that lies ahead. Thank you for listening.